shit.
Like, see. So
What
has it
happened
thinned out?
here? Huh?
Has class thinned out?
Oh, yeah.
So when we're just.
Oh my goodness, that needs more sugar.
The Tristan takes my bolster and puts it over my gland. Inappropriate. You don't know what that word means either. I don't know how to say it. So he was picking up his sticks in there.
She said that we got, I was like, we, I don't think it's gonna be a problem, but it's just too organized.
But like I said, I lost I lost two of
Right, so we decided to repost and then change the dog descriptions. It matches like better what the actual things are, so we don't get all these.
Those being right above the state. Go around the ditch, you know.
Yeah, I
Boy,
thought.
protection.
Supposed to feel safe.
And he was doing it because I did just not get the job.
All right, everybody, let's grab a seat. We are all for pause, right? Okay, yeah.
Yep.
All right. So before we start, it's really good to have Doug and Carol back, especially Doug. Not that we don't appreciate you, but you didn't almost die. So glad you're here. All right. So last week and the week before, we started talking about believing.
Start, Daniel?
Huh?
Are you ready to start?
I am. Do you have a camera? That's all right. If you put it on, will we catch what we already started with? Okay. All right. So what I've been trying to do is set a little foundation for you guys of what we're talking about when we talk about believing. Because there is a difference between hope and faith, right? Believing is about hope. Believing is hoping, and faith is knowing. And you only acquire faith through experience. We like to use the word blind faith. I step out on faith, but that's not real. Because all that is really hoping. Okay, so you have to have experience to acquire faith. And that's what we're working towards. So you can't have faith in something you don't believe in. You have to first come to believe. And that's kind of what I've been trying to point out to you guys. I'm not going to go through this, but if you want to write this down, there's a really interesting thing on YouTube. It's about 10 minutes long. I believe the guy's name is Kevin Hovind. I think it's Hovind. I'm not positive that's how you spell his name. But if you put that name in and put the question, and where did God come from? You'll get a great 10-minute video of the best explanation of God. The guy's really good. It's worth looking up and watching that.
What was the spelling?
Kevin, I'm not sure if I have the name right. If it's Hovind, Hovind. I'm not positive that's the correct way his name is. But if you put where did God come from with that name, then the right thing will come up. And what he's just I think it's on this side. He's just a guy that was a real spiritual guy, and he was on a panel with 3 professors that believe in the non-existence of God, atheists, very intelligent people, and the one professor asked him, "Well, where did God come from?" And his answer is just amazing. It's worth watching. So I'm not going to try to bring in what he did. That's all right. So anybody got any questions on what we've been talking about in step 2? Did our little example help you? Anybody with the point that we're trying to get across? You have to be open-minded. Really, that's the bottom line to what we were talking about, Liz. You have to be open-minded. Okay, so nobody got any questions? Anybody got any questions? Okay. All right, let's go to the big book, page 44, chapter 4, we agnostics. Now, the title of this chapter explains really what this whole second step is about. The word agnostic comes from the root origin of 2 Greek words. And the first one is ag, A-G. And that means, it kind of either means lack or without. Same thing, 6 of one, half dozen the other. So the word ag in the Greek ancient language meant lack. And the word gnostics meant knowledge. So the root origin of the word agnostic really means lack knowledge. So that's really interesting to me. I find that very interesting because if you're agnostic, that really means, what that really means is you lack knowledge. If you really understood who and what God is, or your higher power is, then you wouldn't be agnostic. One time I was in, I believe I was in London, and I was doing a workshop on the second step, and I was in an auditorium. So I was up on a stage, and all the seats were here, and it was packed, probably 500, 600 people sitting there. And we were talking about kind of what we're talking about now, and I asked if there's anybody that doesn't believe in God, and the guy raised his hand. He says, "I'm agnostic." Oh no, he said, "I'm atheist." And I said, "Really?" I said, "There's really no such thing as an atheist." He said, "Well, how could you say that?" And he got really mad. And he said, "I'm atheist. How could you tell me that I don't exist?" I says, "Well, the definition of the word atheist means that an atheist has proof of the non-existence of God." Think about that for a minute. Proof of the non-existence of God. So I said to him, if I know that there's a 2,000-pound purple elephant over here in the corner. And I'm positive of that. I truly believe that with all my heart, that's there. Why do I need to force you to believe that too? So, and on the other end of that is, if you really know that, if you really have proof of the non-existence of God, then there is no God, there's nothing else to talk about. Why do you have to make me believe that too? So I said, therefore, there really can't really no such thing as an atheist, because you're trying to prove a non-existence. That's like that Big Bang theory. And I think that Kevin Hobbit talks about the Big Bang thing too. That's like the Big Bang. Nothing exploded and everything was created from nothing, right? And here we are. An atheist has the proof of the non-existence of God. I don't know how you prove something doesn't exist. Like this thing right here, right? You can't prove to you that this thing is here, but it's right here. It doesn't work. So going back to the root origin of the word agnostic, then lack knowledge. So let's move on from that grasp of what the word means, okay? So instead of looking at agnostic, like we always do, somebody that, however they define agnostic, they believe there's God's got nothing to do with them, or there's no such thing, whatever, however you want to define agnostic. Let's proceed with the understanding what the word really means. The root origin of the word means you lack knowledge. Okay. So back on page 44. That first paragraph is the distinction. We went over that in the first step. On the bottom of that, the last sentence of that first paragraph says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Okay, that means, so if you're alcoholic. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic, the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. That's the first time I read that, I had to reread it because it didn't make sense to me. And after I read it again, I think get somebody on there. After I read it again, I had to reread it a third time because it still didn't make sense to me. In fact, I had to read it a bunch of times before it started making sense, because it doesn't make sense. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. So when I crawled into the rooms, I understood what it was to be doomed to an alcoholic death. I was knocking at the door. So a spiritual way to live seemed like, spiritual basis seemed like, oh, that would make sense. That, so I didn't know why they were saying they're both not easy alternatives to face. But sticking around here, I understood that, because I didn't want to give in to the stuff that I really didn't believe in or wasn't sure of. Kind of like, if I don't see it, I don't believe it. I have to see it to believe it. And working off our emotions the way what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. So that's a pretty interesting statement, right? To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. You would think that the second one should be easy to face, or you'd want, but it's not. Because we still want to do things our way. We still want to live how we live. We still want to be negative to anything that's not something I'm used to or comfortable with. And by the way, what I just said, comfortable with. What we're doing here in step 2 is we're getting in touch with a higher power. Also, before we finish this step, we're going to get in touch with a higher power. And then before we finish this step, you have to be comfortable with your idea of God. Because if you're not comfortable with your idea with God, it is impossible for you to take a third step. And that's a mistake that a good majority of the people in the rooms of recovery make. They're not really comfortable with the idea of God. and they think they've taken a third step. How could you possibly turn your will and your life over to the care of something you're not comfortable with? That's a paradox. So that's why 1 and 2 is, it takes time to do these steps. You can't just zoom through them. The second step, you have to do a lot of work in order to get some type of a beginning of an understanding with God and be comfortable with that. And then it will change for you as you go along. And then now back on 44, he says, but it isn't so difficult. About half of our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find the spiritual basis of life or else. Perhaps it's going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostic. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. And make note that he uses the word alcoholism, right? So he's talking about the disease, he's not talking about drinking. He doesn't say if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcohol. He's talking about the disease of alcoholism. Many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could not wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Then he says, lack of power, that was our dilemma. So you've heard the saying before that knowledge is power, right? Everybody's heard that saying before, knowledge is power. Okay. So if knowledge is power, and the chapter's telling us that we lack knowledge, then that means that we lack power. The problem is we don't believe we lack power. We may even say to ourselves, I might lack the knowledge, but not the power. and not maybe not in words, but certainly in deeds and actions. Okay, we really believe that we have some type of power. Okay, so he says, our human resources, marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So our willpower is not going to take us to where we need to go here. It fails utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Right there, obviously, he says, but where and how are we to find this power? Right there is where the search for God begins, or the search for a higher power. Right there in your book is where the search for a higher power begins. But where and how are we to find this power? So we had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, in italic. And then he uses one word for a whole sentence, obviously, like you idiot. Come on. But where and how do we find this power? So right there, the search begins for God. And then he says, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Now, what is your problem? Alcoholism? We have a lot of problems, don't we? Okay, we're going to find out what the problem is, but there's many, but we'll take them one at a time as we get to them. Okay. But right now, let's just look at what we just said, what the problem was, that I lack the power. Okay. I only have to go up a couple of sentences to find the answer to that. I lack the power. That's my problem. If I lack the power, then it would make sense to me that I need somehow to tap into the power. If my laptop here is got no bars left and it's gonna die, I need to do what? I need to plug it in, right?
Obviously.
Obviously. And if I plug it in, I then hook it up to the power, right? So I need to plug in to the power. And then I can operate. Now, here's the problem, but this comes a little bit later. I can only operate on what I know and what I think and what I believe, how I've always operated. So once I get sober, then, not drinking is the very lowest form of sobriety. It's just the tip of recovery of being sober. Changing who you are, that's what the rest of the steps are all about, right? And so if I don't change who I am, then eventually I will be who I always am. Okay. So, and here he says, so that's to a lot of people don't have, you're from England, right? When I first started,
I'm still flummoxed by how you got 500 of us in one room.
yeah, when I first started going there years ago, a long time ago, probably 20 or more years ago, they didn't talk about God a lot in the rooms. It's changing now, they do. And some people was fierce about that over there. I remember a guy who really getting all bent out of shape, and because he didn't talk about God. And I said, you see how you're acting? Maybe you ought to talk about God. But because that's what the book says here. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, we're going to talk about God. We're going to talk about God. That runs you out of the rooms. It's not my problem. We're going to talk about God. And then he warns us here. Here difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have reopened the subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up particular. So what he's doing here, he's explaining why some people don't like the word God. Okay. I think I told you last week that believing is a spiritual principle, a spiritual tool that every one of us has the power to use, okay? And it's also the state of mind preceding any action. Believing is the state of mind preceding any action, whether it be good or bad, okay? So I have a choice here. I have something to, and all this thing is all this whole chapter is doing is asking us to believe that we have a chance at staying sober, provided we're willing to enlist a power greater than ourselves, whatever that power is to you, okay? And the second step encourages us to believe that this power can restore us to make free and healthy decisions about ourselves. And I didn't have the power to make free and healthy decisions about myself or about anybody else that I thought I had control over. Right? And so that's what it's all about, learning how to make free and healthy decisions. All right, page 46. Before the first paragraph, the bottom of the continued paragraph from the last page, there's a question there. It says, yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Who then made all this, right? The Big Bang Theory again? Says, yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experience. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice, and prejudice that we're talking about here, when you see this word over and over again, is your old ideas. Doesn't mean like you hate black people or you hate Jewish people. It's about your old ideas. That's the prejudice that we're talking about. So as soon as we're able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than self, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend the power which is God. So I've been sober a long time, and I can tell you for sure, I do not understand God today. I don't understand God. But I have an understanding of God that works for me. And that's what each and every one of us need to get, an understanding of God that works for you. Can't comprehend the the greatness. Actually, that if you listen to that YouTube thing, he talks a little about that too, and it's really interesting. Bottom of the page says, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, talking about God, a spirit of the universe, talking about God, underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. What other simple steps? Yeah, the rest of these steps do the work, right? That wasn't a trick question. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of the spirit, again, God he's talking about, is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding for those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. So in the second step, let's read the second step for a minute here. Second step says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So the first thing about this, we talked about this, I think, last week, came to believe means that I didn't get here knowing. I found out when I was here, I started finding these things out, right? So came to believe, that's to have hope, that a power greater than ourselves, and that's one of the qualifications of a higher power. It has to be a power greater than ourselves. Could restore us to sanity. I think we talked about could also, right? Why doesn't it say would? It depends on how much you participate. God's never going to do for me something that I'm not participating in or doing for myself. So could restore us to sanity. An interesting definition of the word sanity for us is sanity. You might want to write this down. Sanity is the ability to see the truth about myself. Sanity is the ability to see the truth about myself. Because you've heard before that the truth will set you free, right? The truth does set us free. And free from the lie, which is insanity. The lie is what the insanity is all about. Insanity is the ability to see the truth, right? Our truth is not the whole truth. That's the problem. Only God can see the whole truth. Our perception of the truth leads us right back to the lie. The insanity. So the truth has to come from somewhere else, somewhere beyond us. I think last week we talked about the tangible things that we remember we talked about what we have in between the four walls and the ceiling and the floor, and that's what we talk about, and we don't really talk about how we feel, or we don't really talk about God. And we talk about, come look at my 100-inch TV on the wall. And I'm not saying those things are bad or wrong or anything like that. But where's God? So I have a question that I've been asking people I sponsor for years and years and years, many, many years, because it was asked of me and I ask it of them. When they come to me with some situation going on, I always ask them, where's God in all of this? Because usually it starts off, I got this problem. I'm sure you do. Where's God in all this? Okay, I think we're on page 47, right? So when therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. And this is repeated a few times in the book. Your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions, which you'll find in this book. Do not let any prejudice, again, your old ideas, you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. And this is something I've never asked myself before I got sober. I never asked myself what this means to me when somebody talked about something spiritual. I didn't pay much attention to it. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth. So right here in the book is where is the start of your spiritual growth. If you follow this right here on this page, a couple of pages ago was the search for God began, and now this is the start of our spiritual growth. So at the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. Emphasis on the word begin. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. I had, I was doing this one year and I had a guy that was really contentious about the fact that this next paragraph was all there was to step 2. This was the whole step 2 right here. And I asked him, why is there like 8 more pages? I think we should rip them out of the book. And I just said to you, emphasis on the word begin, right? So what he's telling us here is that if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. And this next paragraph is a good beginning, but it's certainly not the second step. It says we needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. He's on his way. He didn't get nowhere yet, but he's on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Can be built. So if you look at the words in this paragraph, there's nothing here telling you that this is the definitive step 2. No, it's a beginning. It's something that can be built. It's telling you that you are on your way. And so believing is the cornerstone of the foundation. I think we talked about it one week, but everything is about change, right? When we get here, we have to change. If we don't change, we're going to be screwed. Okay. So the first step really is about a willingness to change. Okay. The second step is about a belief that I can change. The third step is a decision to change. The fourth and fifth steps is action to change. The sixth and seventh step is more action to change. Eighth and ninth step is more action to change. Steps 10 and 11 is more action to change. Step 12, I've changed. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I no longer think, do, and be like I've always thought, done, and been. I've changed. So everything about this program is about change. First one, what?
First step.
Willingness. Yeah,
Willingness.
willingness is, you'll find that throughout all the steps, of course, and we'll come across that in our study, but I first need a willingness to change, right? So I gotta get beat up good enough and stepped on good enough. Remember, we did that example with the $100 bill that was squished up and stepped on and, but everybody still wanted the damn thing, right? Because it still had worth. When we get here, we're beat up, stepped on, but we don't know that we really have any worth left. That's why I read that message from God to you last week. I think that was a powerful message. You said you bought the book and read it, huh? It was good, wasn't it? So, yeah, so willingness to change. And then I have to believe that I can change. I think that process begins the minute you walk into a meeting. The first time you put your sorry ass into a chair in one of the rooms, I think the process has begun that you believe somewhere that there's a little bit of hope for you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. And what brought you there? It's got to be desperation. You know, some people, the wife or the husband or the judge brought them there. I'm not going to say those people don't have a chance. They certainly do. But desperation is the best chance you got. All the negative things that you've experienced and have are needed to work these steps. Again, nobody wakes up in the morning, my life is great, I think I'll join AA. We don't do that. If you're anything like me or anything like most alcoholics, this is the last house on the block. I have tried everything humanly possible not to get here. I didn't even know here was here. I didn't even know there was a here.
Yeah.
But I tried everything humanly possible not to get where I didn't know was existed. Because I tried on my own free will. It didn't work. And once I stopped drinking, I realized how important it was to continue with this process. Because in no time, this mind would take over again. And so each morning I make a new commitment to myself, not to keep away from a drink, but to have God in my life and to be a better person and work on some things. I have to do that. I have to reaffirm the fact each morning that of and by myself, I'm a train wreck. I don't make healthy, good decisions. But when I incorporate God and you people in my life, I'm able to make healthy, free, good decisions. That's a miracle. Doug is a miracle, but he's not the only one. Every one of you are miracles in him. Yeah, free, by my own free will. That's, not a decision born of the slave that I am to this or that. Remember the last one of those things that block you off from God was a dubious pleasure you're not willing to forgo. And I said, to me, that's a bad one, right? That those dubious pleasures make decisions for me. They're not free decisions. No. So, but a free decision is, when you're sober, you know what they are. You're able to have them. So I had to accept the powerlessness in step one. And when I accept the powerlessness in step one, I accept the fact that I can't recover by myself, that I need help. And that help, the second step says, comes from a higher power. So power greater than ourselves. So the second step is about a higher power. The second step is about hope. It's about dealing with reality. Ooh. The second step starts to teach us to learn how to give up the fantasy I don't just mean sexual fantasy, of course, those too, but every other kind of fantasy. I mean, if you're, I've always been a dreamer and a fantasizer my whole life. I built castles in the sky, you know. That's just the type of person that I am. All while just sitting down thinking. Nothing ever gets done, but I gave it a hell of a lot of thought. So when we surrender and we give up, we start giving up all these other things that come with it: anger, hopelessness, fear. The second step is giving us the solution for that. We're not hopeless. We're far from it. There's hope, but that hope lies outside of ourselves. We have to remember that. Here's something I see a lot of people kind of doing and screws them up. They spend a lot of time focusing in this part here when this search for God begins. A lot of time focusing on what they don't know about God. What is it I don't know about God that I've always messed me up, that's always held me back? Don't waste your time. Because if you don't know, just because you're thinking and you're not acknowledging you don't know, it's not going to give you the answer. So focus on what you do know about God. That'll help you get on the right path. Start thinking about what you do know about God, which is, I tell you, we're going to do an exercise at the end of the step for step 2, and that's part of the exercise. So on page 48, and you know, throughout this chapter so far, what we've read, there's a lot of instructions for us. And on page 48, in the middle of the top, that top paragraph there, it says, this sort of thinking had to be abandoned. You see that? Yeah. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. And he's talking about the sensitiveness and unreasoning prejudice and those things. And many of us have been touchy about spiritual matters, right? And so this is an instruction for us here. Though we don't really read it as an instruction, but it is. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside these feelings, such feelings. So that's an instruction. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. So it could be a tedious process, but what has beat you into a state of reasonableness? You know, again, if you're just coming here to, I think I said to you, I think we talked about it early on one of the first couple of weeks. I said to you that any condition you have on your sobriety, you have no sobriety at all. You remember I said that to you? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say that to you again. Any condition you have on your sobriety, you have no sobriety at all. You only have that condition thereof. Okay. So what beats you into a state of reasonableness? If something chased you here just so you can keep your job or keep your marriage or your relationship or get the law off your back or whatever it is, right? That may work, but I doubt you'll stay here, because once that condition is met, you have no reason to be here anymore. Even a good condition, like I want to be a better person. These steps will make me a better person. Well, if you start applying yourselves to the AA principles, soon enough, you're going to realize you're becoming a better person. And now how better you want to be? Well, the condition will say, I'm there. I have arrived. I'm a better person. Thanks, AA. See ya. It doesn't go in that form, but that's exactly what happens. So you can't have any condition upon your sobriety. Does all that make sense to you? Because the second step continues the humbling experience we got in step one. Because this step introduces us to the fact that you're not God. And neither is she or he. And that's a humbling process. It's a humbling thought anyway. So the restoration to sanity is about getting out of our fantasies and learning how to live in reality. I talked about fantasies a minute ago, right? So being restored to sanity means that I have to get out of my fantasies and live in reality. Reality is like, I always use the example of the Wizard of Oz, right? And everybody's seen that movie, right? And I could be like the house spinning crazily in the tornado, right? That's my life, you know? And then boom, I've landed in the land of AA. And I thought, it's not Oklahoma no more. It's not New York no more. And then I met all you little munchkins, all you little funny people. Because you were different. You weren't like the people I was used to being with. You didn't drink. You didn't do drugs. You talked about spiritual things. We cursed and drank and did bad things. It's different here in this land of AA. And then you little munchkins put me on this path, this yellow brick road. And you told me to follow it. Follow the path. And I followed the path. Who was the first one they come across? The scarecrow. Didn't have a brain, did it? Remind me of somebody, didn't it? I realized I didn't have a brain. I sure wasn't using one. I got to take him with me on this path because we both need a brain. And then who did we come across? No, the Tin Man. The Tin Man. Yeah. No heart. I didn't have a heart either. If you saw the things I did and how I lived, you know that son of a bitch ain't got no heart. I didn't have a heart. On this AA path, this yellow brick road, I had to find a brain. I had to find a heart. And then I continued on the path and came across the lion. And I thought the way I've been living, how I've been doing things, I was a tough son of a bitch. I would never think I didn't have courage. But I realized on this new land that I was in, on this new path, that courage was about doing the right thing. I could remember for years I'd be drinking and partying and looking out the window at the people when the sun came up, getting ready to go to work and going to work. And I go, look at those suckers going to work for a living. I ain't got to do that shit. And those are the people that I made fun of. And those are the people that I realized today had courage. Because they went to work and they took care of their families and they did the right thing. And I was out for 3 days at a time, running and gunning. I didn't have any courage. I took that lion with me. And we continued on the yellow brick road on the path. There was some lumps in there. We went through a poppy field, you know. Some people have relapses, you know. Yeah, the flying monkeys, you know. There's all kinds of demons in there, the nasty witches and shit chasing me, you know. There was the obstacles, no doubt about it in this land. And then I got to the big house. The land of Oz. And I realized that I had been worshiping no true God. There was some little guy behind the curtain pulling levers, running my life. That little guy behind the curtain pulling levers was me. I was the great and powerful Oz. By the way, you know why he was great and powerful? Because of the wonderful things he does. But that was no higher power. That was me pulling the levers behind the curtain. And the greatest part of the journey is at the end of the movie. When the good witch comes to Dorothy. And what does she tell her? She tells Dorothy, because Dorothy wanted to go home. And she told Dorothy, you've always had the power, my dear. You just didn't know it. Well, you have always had the power, my dear. You just didn't know it. You've had the power to tap into a 12-step program that will restore your life and bring you to a true, wonderful place with a real God and real people. And all you had to do was tap your heels together 3 times and say, there's no place like home. All you got to do here is put $1 in the basket and come to meetings and work with your sponsor. And you'll realize that you have always had the power to change, my dear. You just didn't know it. You just didn't know it. So I'll talk about fantasies, right? We got to get out of the fantasies and into reality. Because it's a power greater than ourselves that's going to arrange that restoration. It's not a house, a mouse, or a spouse. It's a power greater than ourselves that's going to perform that restoration. So we have to tap into one. So where are we on? Page 48? Sorry, I got off track there with the Wizard of Oz. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories of example, of about electricity. And this is a great example that Bill uses, right? We got electricity. You go in a room, you hit the switch, no conscious thought about the lights going on. The only conscious thought is if the light doesn't go on, if it goes on and blinks right off, right? And before I got here, if I picked the switch and the light didn't go on, the first thing is, oh shit, I didn't pay the bill. Right? Now my first thought is, damn, the bulb's out. But there's no conscious thing going on about what happens that I don't think about something. The way he describes electricity, these currents going through this wire up to the, I don't think about that stuff. I just naturally expect it to happen. Wouldn't it be nice to have a God like that in your life where you just naturally, normally expect to be able to get in touch with God, just like flicking the switch? A real God, not the little guy behind the curtain.
Mhm.
So he gives us an example. He says the Procyclic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around, each at incredible speed. I don't want to read the whole thing, but it's it's a great example that Bill gives us, because none of us understand what we're reading. And that's Bill's point. Okay. So instead of regarding ourselves, we're on page 49, as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists choose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? So now here's another instruction. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. So the instruction here is to lay aside your prejudice. Your prejudice is what? Again, it's not, it's my old ideas. That's the prejudice that we're fighting here. That's the biggest prejudice you're ever going to fight when you get sober, is your old ideas. He says, people of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. I certainly didn't. I thought I did. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception, whatever. Bill felt the same way. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practice when we might have observed that many spiritually minded people of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness, which we should have sought ourselves. Instead, we looked at human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings at a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. So what spiritual side of life is there if you are agnostic or atheist? I would think an atheist, one that really believes he can prove the non-existence of God, doesn't need a spiritual basis of life. Because for what? The idea of a spiritual basis of life is to feel more in tune with the power greater than ourselves, I would think. So in our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with the particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. There are questions for each individual to settle for himself. So this is what the whole back of the book is about. The whole back of the book, the stories, is about step 2. There are different ways that people have approached and conceived of the power of God. Each story talks about that. So all the stories in the back of the book is step 2. Has anybody got any questions about something? We got like 5 minutes left. Yes.
The house, the mouse. I love your analogies, but the mouse, I don't understand. I understand the spouse, I understand the house, but the mouse.
I don't know.
It
Just just rhymed. It sounded good. The house, the spouse, and the mouse.
That was good.
Can't explain that one, sorry. Anybody else got a question? Need to talk about something that we talked about today? So what we're doing here is we're working on the believing and the hope part, so we can get to the 3rd step, having some type of a relationship with the higher power. Okay. And again, in the last few minutes, let's talk about this. Again, you have to feel comfortable with your concept of God. That's why we're going to do an exercise at the end of this step to help us with that. Okay, because again, if you're not comfortable with your concept of God, it's impossible to take the 3rd step. Impossible. And so many people, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the original manuscript. So the first 2 steps, right? let's see here real quick. I'm gonna leave you with this. This is page 60. The three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our lives, step one. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, step two. And C, that God could and would if he was also step two. Yes, not step three. So A is step one, B and C is step two. The three pertinent, how do I know that? Well, look what it says next. Being convinced we're at step three. Okay. A lot of these treatment centers will tell you that's A, B, and C is 1, 2, and 3. It's not. Now, let me read to you what Bill wrote in the original manuscript. And they made him take it out. It was a big fight. Bill said, I'm not going to do any more writing over this fight they had. And they asked him, please, can you just say, and he conceded to the fact, but this is what they made him take out. After the ABCs of how it worked, there was a sentence that they made him take out. And this is what the sentence said. So it's A, B, and C, and then it said, if you are not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away, exclamation point. So Bill Wilson wanted you, let's look at the original manuscript to get the intent that Bill Wilson was trying to give us. Whether they took it out or not, we still have the intent here. And the intent for him, with an exclamation point, was for you to reread the book to this point, the first two steps, before you go into step three. Nobody does that today. They all go right in past 1 and 2 and right into 3, and they don't understand. They don't have any type of understanding with God. They're not comfortable with their God, or they're a little comfortable, a little understanding. And Bill's telling you to throw the book away, because if you don't have a God that you're comfortable with, to begin this journey, you can't turn your will and your life over. You just can't do it. And that's why Bill told you don't go ahead to step 3, because he knows you're going to get loaded eventually. Okay, so we'll leave off there. That's it for today. Thank you. Same time, same channel next week. See you guys.
Thank you, Danny.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Good night.
Hey, Danny, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Jeff, how are you, pal? So that first couple of minutes still going to be on there?
Thanks, Danny.
All right, guys, take care.
Yeah, thanks, Danny.
Hi, thank you.
So now this